SLU-PP-332 side effects. What are the risks? In this video, we're going to talk about how experiment without data is dangerous and what we actually know about SLU-PP. So before you get excited about this exercise pill, we're going to talk about some of the risks that we may want to be considerate about and what the research shows. And so I'm Regan Archibald, founder of Ageless Future. We believe that you can get healthier at any age, no matter where you're at in life. So if you're someone who's struggling with your health, or you're somebody who's just looking to get to that next level, go to agelessfuture.com. My team is amazing. They'll take great care of you. So let's talk about SLU-PP-332, and can't really find a lot of safety data out there because it's a new molecule. It was discovered just a few years ago, and it has a lot of work that needs to be done before we can definitively say that it's safe. But we have the mechanism of action very clearly defined. But my philosophy on these new things is I think the most dangerous thing that we can do in medicine is to not be doing proper diagnostics. We believe in building an operating system around your health. And sometimes that operating system, it needs clarity. Where do you want it to go? And then what are the diagnostics that we're going to be unraveling so that we can understand that you're pointed in the right direction? And so there's a lot of online conversations around SLU-PP-332, and there's a lot of excitement around it, a lot of data, but it's very short on safety nuance. And so hopefully this video is going to help you understand that yes, this compound has extraordinary potential. The data on fatty acid oxidation, mitochondrial biogenesis, metabolic improvement is very compelling, but it's still an investigational compound and there are no human trials. And so the safety profile has some real unknowns that any serious clinician needs to acknowledge. So let's walk through what we know. So here's the problem. Novel compounds get introduced into the public. A research paper drops. The headline's exciting. Exercise pill that increased fat burning by 25%. And then people start promoting it, and this unregulated supplement company starts selling it, or an influencer from research use only. So make sure you're getting anything from a compounded pharmacy 503A, and make sure that there's medical oversight. And I think without any baseline labs, if you are interested in exploring these molecules, there are pathways to do it. But if you're doing it on your own, that's how people seem to get hurt. Now, SLU-PP-332, it is not an FDA-approved chemical. It's an investigational small molecule with very promising preclinical data and zero published long-term human safety studies. That doesn't mean you should ignore it. It means that maybe you should actively track it, and then you can approach it with the respect that any powerful molecule deserves. Because if you have baseline labs, medical oversight, a clear framework for monitoring outcomes, the question isn't just, well, does it work? The question is, what else does it do? Because you're the owner of your health. You want to be taking a deep dive into what it's actually doing to your physiology. So let's start what the research actually shows and what reasonable concerns there are. So diet-induced mice with SLU-PP-332, they show this impressive metabolic outcome, 25% increase in fatty acid oxidation. They increased their resting energy expenditure, they decreased fat mass, they improved insulin sensitivity. The visceral fat, that stubborn fat that gets built up around our organs, that reduced significantly, and there are no major toxicity signals. And these rats were taking enormous volumes of SLU. And so it appears to be well tolerated at the doses used. The oral analog, which is SLU-915, that demonstrated the same comparable exercise mimetic activity, and it was conditioned to be a candidate for obesity, type 2 diabetes, sarcopenia, and muscle dystrophy. In this one too, there's, with the oral version of it, no major safety flags, but it's all short-term animal data. And unfortunately, only 10% of animal data is translated to humans. So when you have full toxicology panels, carcinogenicity studies, human pharmacokinetic data, those are missing. And so that's where there's legitimate concerns. And so first of all, the pathways. Well, these estrogen-related receptor signaling and hormone balance. So SLU activates estrogen-related receptors. The ERR alpha, ERR beta, and ERR gamma. These are not distinct from estrogen receptors, but they share a different structural homology. So if you think about, a lot of people think, oh, it's working on the estrogen-related receptors, therefore it's going to disrupt estrogen. It doesn't do that. The long-term effects of these ERR receptors on hormone balance, particularly estrogen, testosterone, reproductive health, they're not clearly defined in humans. But so far, we don't see that risk or characterization in the animal models. The second issue is cardiac remodeling at higher doses. So ERR receptors are expressed in cardiac tissue. That's what drives this VO2 max and this endurance capability. That's what gets those muscle fibers, those slow twitch muscle fibers, producing more energy, even without more exercise. But this activation drives mitochondrial biogenesis in the heart, which is typically beneficial. But at high doses with prolonged use, the effects on cardiac remodeling at the cellular level, we just don't know. Is that good? And I'm a big believer in pulsing. So every system has feedback loops. And if you're continually pulsing that feedback loop, putting your body at danger, even if it's something as benign as like a vitamin C or vitamin B. Get it from food and, trigger these receptors through exercise. So the people who put themselves at the highest level of risk are the ones who have not cleaned up their diet. They're not getting to bed on time. They don't have good sleep hygiene. They're not exercising. That's where your real risk is. The third area that I was concerned with is there's no long-term human data at all. I mean, every safety conclusion we have is just understanding mechanism of action from animal models. And then we are taking that guess from rodent safety to human safety. And so once again, this is where anytime I'm running an experiment, I jokingly say, well, if I don't make it through that experiment, don't repeat it. Find out what I did and do not do the same thing I did. But I'm actually very strategic about how to dose it, being very minimal and conservative, and then only staying on these things, especially if they're new, for a few days at a time, and then retesting my labs to make sure everything looks good. This is not me dismissing SLU-PP or any other new molecules, but it's my kind of opinion is to have proper oversight. And I know we can't wait for the FDA to approve every little thing that comes out. In some cases, we have to make the move. And especially if you're somebody who is struggling and you don't want to be on the GLP-1s, or maybe the GLP-1s were too aggressive, you had too many side effects, but you're looking for this way of burning fat and having something to cycle in. And that's where you came across this video on SLU-PP. So, the best way to know if something's helping or hurting you is to start with a baseline. Start with baseline labs, but also make sure you have like a baseline VO2 max. I have a whole worksheet called the Fitness 50 at age 100 benchmarks. I built these for Dan Sullivan, who's got a goal to live to be 156. And yes, that's a ridiculous goal. But he said, what does a 100-year-old want to be doing that a fit 50-year-old can do? And that's where I came up with these 11 exercises. Now, Dan Sullivan turns 82 next month, and he's healthier every time I see him, about every 3 months. So, it's not just getting your blood labs ran, but see how fast you can run a 5K or how far you can run. See what your mile time is. These are all really important pieces of baseline that you want to look at. And then you apply the input, which in this case, it would be SLU-PP-332. And use the scientific method. You observe, you hypothesize, and then you adjust. Once you test your hypothesis with data, and that data has got to be both objective data and then how is your physical performance? So first question I always ask, when someone's interested in a cutting edge protocol, like, well, where are you starting from? Because without a baseline, we have no signal. Without a signal, we don't know if you're making improvements or not. And so we can't separate the new inputs from where you're at. And so SLU-PP-332, there are more unknowns than knowns when it comes to hormone balance and cardiac signaling. We're seeing that it has a very safe profile and no lethal dose has been established in these animal models. And so I think running your labs prior to this makes a lot of sense. But look at your thyroid, your T3, your T4, your TSH, because the estrogen-related receptor does intersect these signaling. Look at your ALT, your AST, look at your inflammatory markers, your C-reactive protein, your homocysteine. That will give you a more meaningful understanding of where you're starting from. So if you want to go deeper, find out what peptides are best for you, go to agelessfuture.com. All of our peptides come from 503A licensed compounding pharmacies written by our prescribing providers. I'm Regan Archibald, and if you want to go to the next video on what is SLU-PP-332, then I'll see you there. Just click on the link below. Thanks for being part of the community.